A leaked WhatsApp message just revealed the biggest government corruption scandal in British history. At 11:37 p.m. on March 14, 2025, a senior civil servant sent a text to his property investment partner that read, "Crossrail extension announcement tomorrow at 2 p.m. Buy everything you can in Dartford tonight." Within 18 hours, they had purchased 4 properties worth £3.2 million. 24 hours later, the government announced the Crossrail extension to Dartford, and those properties increased in value by £800,000 overnight. This wasn't luck. It wasn't smart investing. It was criminal insider trading, using confidential government information to steal wealth from ordinary British families. The leaked messages reveal a systematic conspiracy involving cabinet ministers, senior civil servants, and their business associates who have made hundreds of millions of pounds by trading on advanced knowledge of government policy announcements. They buy properties in areas about to benefit from infrastructure spending. They sell in areas about to be hit by planning restrictions. They short property markets before announcing tax changes that will crash values. And they do all of this while telling the public that housing policy is designed to help ordinary families, not to enrich government insiders. The scale of this corruption is so vast that it explains why Britain's housing crisis can never be solved. Government officials aren't trying to fix the housing market. They're using their positions to manipulate it for personal profit, and they're getting obscenely rich while millions of families can't afford homes. The leaked documents expose a WhatsApp group called Westminster Property Club that includes 47 government officials, from junior ministers to permanent secretaries in key departments. The messages reveal a sophisticated insider trading network that has operated for at least 8 years, generating profits that dwarf the salaries of the people involved. Here's how the system works in practice. Government officials receive advance notice of policy announcements days or weeks before they become public. This includes infrastructure projects, planning decisions, tax changes, and regulatory updates that affect property values. Instead of maintaining confidentiality as required by their positions, they share this information with personal investment networks that include family members, business partners, and private investment funds. The group operates through coded language designed to avoid detection by compliance monitoring. Green light in Zone 6 means a planning approval is coming for Outer London. Red flag Manchester means negative policy announcements affecting the Northwest. Golden triangle active means infrastructure investment in the Cambridge-London-Oxford corridor. But the leaked messages from March 2025 show that group members had abandoned coded language and were sharing specific information about billion-pound government announcements with shocking casualness. One message thread reveals that 5 cabinet ministers were personally involved in property purchases based on advanced knowledge of the spring budget. They bought agricultural land in areas designated for new towns 24 hours before the public announcement. Land values in those areas increased by 400% within a week of the official announcement. The total profits generated by this single transaction exceeded £25 million, with individual cabinet ministers making between £2 and £8 million each. Another thread shows Treasury officials sharing advanced details of stamp duty changes with property developers who adjusted their sales strategies to maximize profits before the changes took effect. The developers avoided paying approximately £15 million in stamp duty that would have been owed if they had completed sales after the policy announcement. Meanwhile, ordinary homebuyers who weren't privy to insider information were caught unprepared and faced significantly higher costs when the policy changes were implemented. The Crossrail corruption represents the most systematic and profitable abuse of government information in modern British history, and the leaked documents reveal how officials turned public infrastructure investment into private wealth generation. Crossrail, officially known as the Elizabeth Line, involved over £20 billion of public investment in London transport infrastructure. But government officials and their associates extracted hundreds of millions of pounds in personal profits by trading on advanced knowledge of station locations, opening dates, and route extensions. The process began in 2015, 3 years before Crossrail stations opened to the public. Transport Department officials with access to confidential planning documents began purchasing properties near planned stations, often through shell companies to hide their identities. The leaked messages show that these officials knew exact opening dates, passenger forecasts, and economic impact assessments that wouldn't become public for years. Property values near Crossrail stations typically increased by 30 to 60% between initial purchase and line opening, generating enormous profits for insider investors. One leaked email thread reveals that a senior transport official purchased 12 properties worth £8.4 million near planned Crossrail stations between 2015 and 2018. When the line opened, those properties were valued at over £15 million, generating a profit of £6.6 million on public infrastructure investment. But the corruption extended beyond individual property purchases. Government officials shared confidential information with property development companies that used advanced knowledge to acquire land for major residential and commercial projects near Crossrail stations. These companies obtained planning permissions based on transport connectivity that wasn't yet public knowledge, giving them massive competitive advantages over developers who were working with publicly available information. The leaked documents show that at least 34 major development projects worth over £2 billion were initiated based on insider information about Crossrail planning. The developers involved paid informal commissions to government officials through consultant agreements, speaking fees, and investment partnerships that provided plausible legal cover for what were essentially bribes for confidential information. The human cost of this corruption is staggering. Families living near planned Crossrail stations faced massive rent increases and property tax assessments based on transport improvements they didn't know were coming. Many were forced to move because they couldn't afford housing costs that had increased due to insider trading by government officials. Meanwhile, the officials responsible for serving the public interest were using their positions to extract maximum profit from the public investments they were supposed to be managing responsibly. The HS2 insider trading scandal reveals how government officials have systematically stolen wealth from communities along the route, while claiming to improve transport connections for ordinary people. High Speed 2 represents the largest infrastructure project in British history, with costs exceeding £150 billion of public money. But leaked documents show that government officials and their associates have made billions of pounds in personal profits by trading on confidential information about route planning, station locations, and land acquisition requirements. The corruption began before HS2 was even officially announced to Parliament. Department for Transport officials with access to route planning documents began purchasing farmland and industrial properties along the proposed corridor as early as 2009. They knew exactly which properties would be subject to compulsory purchase, which would benefit from proximity to new stations, and which would be blighted by construction disruption. Property purchases were coordinated through investment syndicates that included ministers, civil servants, and external consultants working on the project. The leaked WhatsApp messages show officials sharing GPS coordinates of land parcels that would become valuable due to HS2 planning, often months before this information was shared with affected communities or even with Parliament. One message thread from 2019 reveals a transport minister directing family members to purchase specific agricultural land near the planned Birmingham interchange. The land cost £400,000 per acre when purchased based on insider information. When the station location was officially confirmed 2 years later, the same land was valued at over £2.3 million per acre. The minister's family members sold the land to HS2 contractors for £14.8 million, generating a profit of over £10 million from a 2-year investment based on information they should never have possessed. But the most cynical aspect of HS2 corruption involves officials deliberately designing route changes to benefit their personal property investments. The leaked documents show that at least 6 major route modifications were made not for engineering or cost reasons, but to increase the value of properties owned by government officials and their associates. Communities were told that route changes were necessary for environmental or technical reasons, but the real purpose was to redirect public infrastructure investment toward privately owned land. The social impact of this corruption extends far beyond financial losses. Entire communities along the HS2 route have been destroyed by planning blight and compulsory purchases, while the officials responsible for managing the project have personally profited from the disruption they've imposed on working families. Property owners who weren't privy to insider information have lost millions of pounds in property value, while insiders have gained equivalent amounts through advanced knowledge and strategic positioning. The Planning Permission Corruption Network reveals how government officials have monetized the entire development approval process, turning public planning policy into a private wealth generation system. Local councils and central government departments control planning permissions worth hundreds of billions of pounds annually. but leaked documents show that these decisions are routinely influenced by personal financial interests rather than public benefit considerations. The system operates through a network of planning consultants, property developers, and government officials who share confidential information about upcoming planning decisions in exchange for investment opportunities and financial kickbacks. Officials with advanced knowledge of planning approvals purchase land or properties that will benefit from development permissions, often through family members or business associates, to maintain plausible deniability. The leaked messages reveal specific examples of this corruption across multiple government departments. Ministry of Housing officials shared advanced details of Greenbelt boundary changes with property developers who purchased agricultural land hours before planning restrictions were relaxed. The land purchases generated profits of over £40 million when development permissions were subsequently granted. Local council planning officers coordinated property purchases with developers based on advanced knowledge of major infrastructure approvals, including shopping centres, housing estates, and industrial developments. One WhatsApp thread shows a council planning chief directing his brother-in-law to purchase industrial land 24 hours before announcing planning approval for a major distribution centre. The land value increased from £800,000 to £4.2 million within 6 months of the planning approval. Environment Department officials shared confidential information about environmental impact assessments with property investors who use the advanced knowledge to purchase or sell properties based on upcoming planning restrictions or approvals. Properties in areas about to be designated as protected environmental zones were sold before restrictions reduced their development value, while properties in areas about to be released from environmental protections were purchased before development potential increased their market value. The corruption extends to major national infrastructure decisions, including airport expansions, motorway construction, and energy projects. Officials involved in these decisions have consistently used their positions to benefit personally from policy announcements that affect property values across wide geographic areas. The leaked documents show Treasury officials purchasing properties near planned airport expansions, transport ministers investing in land near motorway junctions, and Energy Department officials buying rural land designated for renewable energy projects. The scale of profits generated through planning corruption often exceeds the salaries of government officials by factors of 10 or 20, creating massive financial incentives for continued abuse of public positions for private gain. The tax policy insider trading reveals how government officials have used advanced knowledge of fiscal changes to avoid paying millions of pounds in taxes, while ordinary families face unexpected financial burdens from the same policy changes. Every budget and fiscal statement involves tax changes that significantly affect property values and investment returns, but government officials consistently position themselves to benefit from these changes rather than being subject to them like ordinary taxpayers. The leaked documents show Treasury officials, cabinet ministers, and their advisors trading on advanced knowledge of stamp duty changes, capital gains tax modifications, and inheritance tax reforms to minimize their personal tax liabilities while maximizing investment returns. The corruption involves both avoiding taxes on existing investments and generating profits from tax changes that harm ordinary families. Stamp duty policy provides the clearest examples of how this insider trading operates. Government officials receive final details of stamp duty changes weeks before they're announced to Parliament, giving them time to structure property transactions to minimize tax costs or maximize benefits from temporary reliefs. The leaked messages show Treasury officials completing property sales hours before stamp duty increases take effect, saving hundreds of thousands of pounds in taxes that ordinary buyers would have to pay. When stamp duty holidays are announced, the same officials purchase multiple properties during relief periods, then sell them after relief periods end, capturing maximum benefit from public tax policies designed to stimulate market activity. One leaked email thread reveals a Treasury minister completing the sale of 4 investment properties on the day before a stamp duty increase was announced, avoiding over £600,000 in additional tax costs. The same minister used the proceeds to purchase properties during a stamp duty holiday announced 6 months later, maximizing the benefit from both policy changes. Capital gains tax policy changes provide even larger opportunities for insider trading because officials can time the sale of assets to benefit from rate changes or exemption modifications. The leaked documents show government officials selling property portfolios worth tens of millions of pounds hours before capital gains tax increases take effect, avoiding tax payments that would have been owed by ordinary investors who didn't have advance knowledge of policy changes. Inheritance tax reforms have been particularly profitable for government officials who use advance knowledge to restructure family trusts and property ownership arrangements before policy changes take effect. The leaked messages show senior civil servants moving assets offshore and modifying inheritance arrangements based on confidential Treasury planning documents, avoiding millions of pounds in tax liabilities that ordinary families will face when the same policy changes are implemented. The most cynical aspect of this tax policy corruption involves officials designing tax changes specifically to benefit their personal financial situations, while imposing costs on ordinary taxpayers who aren't privy to insider information. The foreign property investment corruption exposes how government officials have used their positions to facilitate money laundering and tax avoidance by international criminals, while personally profiting from these arrangements. British property has become the preferred destination for corrupt money from around the world. But this isn't happening by accident. Government officials are actively facilitating dirty money flows into UK property markets in exchange for personal financial benefits and investment opportunities. The leaked documents reveal systematic cooperation between Home Office officials, Treasury civil servants, and international criminal networks that use UK property to launder stolen wealth from developing countries. Officials provide advance warning of anti-money laundering investigations, share confidential information about beneficial ownership requirements, and help structure property purchases to avoid financial disclosure regulations. In exchange, they receive investment opportunities in offshore property funds, consulting fees from shell companies, and direct payments for their cooperation in circumventing UK financial regulations. The scale of this corruption is measured in billions of pounds annually, with government officials personally benefiting from criminal money flows that they're supposed to be preventing. One leaked email chain reveals Home Office officials sharing confidential information about upcoming visa restrictions with Russian oligarchs who used the advance warning to accelerate property purchases before sanctions took effect. The officials involved received consulting payments totaling over £2 million from shell companies controlled by the same oligarchs, creating obvious conflicts of interest that were never disclosed to Parliament or oversight bodies. Treasury officials have provided similar assistance to Chinese Communist Party officials who use UK property to hide wealth stolen from public infrastructure projects. The leaked documents show British officials helping structure property purchases through Cayman Islands companies, British Virgin Islands trusts, and other offshore vehicles designed to hide beneficial ownership from both Chinese and UK authorities. Foreign Office officials have used diplomatic immunity and embassy facilities to facilitate property transactions by corrupt politicians and military officials from Africa, Asia, and Latin America who need to move stolen wealth out of their home countries quickly and quietly. The leaked messages show British diplomats coordinating with estate agents, law firms, and wealth managers to expedite property purchases for individuals who would face serious legal consequences if their financial activities were disclosed to their home governments. The human cost of this corruption extends far beyond the UK property market. Every £1 billion of dirty money that flows into London property increases housing costs for ordinary British families who are competing with international criminals for limited housing stock. Meanwhile, the developing countries where this money is stolen lose resources that should be invested in healthcare, education, and infrastructure for some of the world's poorest populations. The media and judicial corruption reveals how government officials have systematically suppressed investigations into property market manipulation while personally profiting from the same corrupt activities they're supposed to be investigating. The British media has largely ignored the insider trading and money laundering scandals documented in leaked government communications, not because the evidence isn't compelling, but because media owners and senior journalists are personally implicated in the same corrupt activities. Property corruption generates enormous advertising revenues for newspapers and television channels through estate agency marketing, property development promotions, and financial services advertising. Media companies receive hundreds of millions of pounds annually from the same property industry figures who are bribing government officials and manipulating planning decisions. This creates obvious conflicts of interest that prevent honest reporting about property market corruption. The leaked documents show that senior journalists and media executives are personally involved in property investment syndicates with government officials, sharing advance information about policy announcements and coordinating investment strategies based on insider knowledge. Television presenters who cover politics and economics own property portfolios worth tens of millions of pounds that benefit directly from the same government policies they report on without disclosing their financial interests to viewers. Newspaper property correspondents regularly attend investment briefings hosted by the same government officials they're supposed to be monitoring independently, receiving confidential information about upcoming policy announcements in exchange for favorable coverage of housing market trends. The judicial system faces similar corruption through property investments by senior judges, court officials, and legal professionals who benefit financially from the property speculation they're supposed to be regulating through planning law, property disputes, and financial crime prosecutions. High Court judges own investment properties worth millions of pounds that benefit from planning decisions they review on appeal, creating conflicts of interest that are rarely disclosed and never addressed through recusal procedures. The leaked messages show senior legal figures sharing advance information about court decisions affecting property values with investment partners who use the information to structure property transactions before legal judgments become public. Regulatory bodies supposed to investigate financial crime and market manipulation are staffed by officials who are personally involved in the same corrupt activities they're mandated to prevent. The Serious Fraud Office has consistently failed to investigate property market corruption because senior investigators own investment properties and maintain business relationships with the same individuals they would be investigating. Financial Conduct Authority officials have business interests in property development companies and estate agencies that benefit from the lack of regulatory oversight they're supposed to be providing. The result is a completely captured regulatory system where government corruption is protected by the same institutions supposed to prevent it, ensuring that property market manipulation continues indefinitely without serious legal consequences for the officials involved. The international intelligence corruption reveals how British government officials have used their access to classified information about foreign governments and economic conditions to make profitable property investments while compromising national security in the process. Government officials with security clearances receive confidential intelligence about political instability, economic crises, and policy changes in other countries that significantly affect international property markets and currency exchange rates. Instead of using this information solely for national security purposes, they've systematically traded on classified intelligence to generate personal profits through property investments and currency speculation. The leaked documents show Foreign Office officials using classified intelligence about upcoming political coups and economic collapses in other countries to short property markets and currencies before instability becomes public knowledge. Treasury officials have used confidential information about international sanctions and trade agreements to position property investments in countries that will benefit from policy changes before these changes are announced publicly. Intelligence service personnel have shared classified economic intelligence with family members and business associates who use the information to make profitable investments in international property markets, often through offshore companies to hide the source of their investment capital. One leaked intelligence report reveals British officials using classified information about planned Chinese investment restrictions to sell Hong Kong properties days before policy announcements that reduced property values by 30%. The officials involved avoided losses of over £12 million by trading on classified intelligence that wasn't available to ordinary investors. Another document shows officials using confidential information about Russian sanctions planning to purchase properties from oligarchs who needed to liquidate assets quickly before their wealth was frozen by international authorities. The properties were bought at significant discounts and resold after sanctions were implemented, generating profits of over £25 million from classified government intelligence. Middle Eastern intelligence about oil price manipulation and production agreements has been used by Energy Department officials to make profitable investments in Aberdeen property markets that fluctuate based on North Sea oil activity. The officials used classified information about OPEC decisions and oil reserve assessments to time property investments that generated returns of over 40% annually. The national security implications of this corruption are severe because officials with access to classified information have financial incentives to share intelligence with unauthorized parties who can profit from the information. This creates vulnerabilities to foreign intelligence services who can exploit these financial relationships to gain access to British state secrets. The leaked documents suggest that at least 12 senior officials with top-secret clearances have business relationships with individuals suspected of working for foreign intelligence services, creating obvious counterintelligence risks that have never been properly investigated or addressed by security authorities. The pension fund and insurance corruption exposes how government officials have manipulated retirement savings and insurance policies to benefit their personal property investments while destroying the retirement security of millions of ordinary workers. Government officials control regulatory policies that affect how pension funds and insurance companies can invest their assets, representing trillions of pounds in retirement savings and insurance reserves that could significantly affect property markets if invested differently. But instead of managing these policies in the public interest, officials have designed regulations that force pension funds to invest in property markets in ways that benefit the personal investments of government officials and their associates. The leaked documents reveal coordination between Treasury officials and pension fund managers to direct retirement savings towards specific property investments that government officials have already positioned themselves to benefit from through advanced knowledge and insider information. Local government pension scheme regulations have been modified to require increased investment in UK commercial property. But the specific properties eligible for pension fund investment are often owned or controlled by companies associated with government officials who designed the regulations. The result is that ordinary workers' retirement savings are used to inflate property values that benefit government insiders, rather than generating returns for the pension scheme members who actually own the money. Private pension regulations have been similarly manipulated to encourage self-invested personal pension schemes to invest in residential property, creating artificial demand for buy-to-let properties owned by government officials and their business associates. The regulatory changes were justified as providing more investment choice for pension savers, but the leaked messages show they were actually designed to create captive buyers for property investments that officials wanted to sell at inflated prices. Insurance company investment regulations have been modified to require increased reserves held in property assets, forcing insurance companies to purchase commercial and residential properties at prices inflated by insider trading and market manipulation by government officials. The regulatory changes were justified as improving financial stability for insurance companies, but they actually transfer wealth from insurance policyholders to property speculators with government connections. The leaked documents show insurance department officials coordinating with insurance company executives to time these regulatory changes to benefit property investments owned by officials and their families. The human cost involves millions of workers whose retirement savings and insurance policies are being systematically looted to benefit government officials who are supposed to be protecting their financial interests. Pension fund returns are reduced because workers' money is invested in overpriced properties rather than genuinely profitable investments. Insurance premiums are higher because company reserves are wasted on property speculation rather than being invested efficiently to reduce costs for policyholders. The academic and research corruption reveals how government officials have manipulated university research and academic institutions to produce favorable reports about property market policies while personally benefiting from the conclusions of research they've secretly influenced. Universities receive hundreds of millions of pounds in government funding for economic research, housing policy analysis, and urban planning studies that significantly influence public policy debates about property markets. But the leaked documents show that government officials routinely pay academic researchers to produce predetermined conclusions that support policy changes beneficial to officials' personal property investments. The corruption operates through research grants, consulting contracts, and academic positions that provide financial incentives for universities and individual researchers to produce reports supporting whatever conclusions government officials need to justify their policy preferences. Housing research centres at major universities receive government funding specifically to produce reports showing that current housing policies are effective and beneficial, even when the evidence clearly demonstrates that these policies have failed to improve housing affordability or availability. urban planning departments are funded to produce research supporting specific development projects and planning decisions that benefit property investments owned by government officials, with predetermined conclusions written into research grant applications before any actual research begins. The leaked messages show Education Department officials coordinating with university administrators to ensure that housing market research produces conclusions supporting increased property investment and reduced planning restrictions, regardless of what independent analysis might reveal about the effectiveness of these approaches. Think tanks and policy research organizations receive government funding and donations from property developers to produce reports that appear to be independent academic research, but are actually paid advocacy for predetermined policy positions that benefit government officials and their business associates. The research is used to justify policy changes to Parliament, the media, and the public, creating false legitimacy for decisions that are actually based on personal financial interests rather than genuine policy analysis. Academic conferences and research publications are systematically manipulated to suppress research findings that contradict government officials' preferred policy narratives, while amplifying research that supports profitable policy changes. Researchers who produce findings critical of current housing policies face funding cuts, academic harassment, and career destruction, while researchers who support profitable policies receive increased funding, academic promotion, and lucrative consulting opportunities. The result is a completely corrupted academic research environment where housing policy analysis serves the financial interests of government officials rather than providing honest information about how to address Britain's housing crisis. University students and faculty are denied access to honest research about housing markets, while the public receives deliberately misleading information designed to support policies that benefit government insiders at the expense of ordinary families seeking affordable housing. The healthcare and social services corruption reveals how government officials have monetized the housing-related health crisis while personally profiting from policies that make housing problems worse and increase demand for public services. Housing costs and housing insecurity create enormous public health costs through stress-related illnesses, family breakdown, child welfare problems, and mental health crises that require expensive government intervention through the NHS and social services. But instead of implementing housing policies that would reduce these public health costs, government officials have designed policies that deliberately worsen housing problems while creating profitable investment opportunities in healthcare and social services for themselves and their business associates. The leaked documents show health department officials using confidential information about planned NHS funding increases to purchase properties near hospitals and healthcare facilities that benefit from public investment in medical services. Officials coordinate property purchases with private healthcare companies that receive government contracts, ensuring that public healthcare investment generates private property profits for government insiders. Social services officials have used advanced knowledge of family support service funding to purchase properties in areas where social services spending will increase property values, particularly near schools and children's centres that receive government investment. Housing officials have deliberately designed policies that increase homelessness and housing insecurity because higher levels of housing distress generate increased government spending on temporary accommodation, social services, and mental health support that creates profitable contracts for companies owned by government officials and their associates. The leaked messages show officials celebrating increases in rough sleeping and family homelessness because these statistics justify increased government spending on services provided by companies they have financial interests in. Mental health services funding has been specifically directed toward areas where government officials own commercial properties, housing mental health clinics and treatment centres, ensuring that public investment in mental health support generates private rental income for officials who created the policies causing mental health problems in the first place. The cruelty of this corruption is staggering because government officials are literally profiting from human suffering. They have deliberately created through housing policies designed to generate social problems that require expensive government intervention. Families forced into homelessness by housing policies generate profits for officials through temporary accommodation contracts, mental health service provision, and child welfare intervention that could have been prevented through effective housing policies that officials reject because they're more profitable personally than genuine solutions. Children removed from families due to housing instability generate profits for officials through care service contracts and foster care arrangements funded by the same government departments that create housing policies preventing families from maintaining stable accommodation. The exit strategy corruption reveals how government officials are preparing to monetize the collapse of the British property market while positioning themselves to profit from the economic devastation their policies will create for ordinary families. The leaked documents show that senior officials across multiple government departments are coordinating to implement policies that will deliberately crash property values in specific areas while protecting and enhancing property values in areas where they have personal investments. This represents the final stage of a systematic wealth transfer from ordinary British families to government officials and their associated investor networks. The strategy involves creating artificial housing crises in working-class areas through planning restrictions, infrastructure neglect, and service cuts that reduce property values, allowing officials and their associates to purchase properties at discounted prices before implementing improvement policies that restore and increase values. Social housing estates and council-owned properties are being systematically prepared for transfer to private companies controlled by government officials, who will purchase them at below-market prices using public money before converting them to market-rate housing that generates enormous profits. The leaked messages show housing department officials designing estate regeneration policies specifically to enable this wealth transfer, with predetermined contracts awarded to companies they have financial interests in. Regional economic policies are being coordinated to concentrate government investment in areas where officials have existing property holdings, while withdrawing investment from areas where ordinary families own homes, ensuring that public money benefits private investments, rather than improving outcomes for communities that need government support. Transport infrastructure investment is being deliberately directed away from areas with high levels of working-class home ownership toward areas where government officials and wealthy investors own property, ensuring that public transport investment benefits private wealth rather than improving mobility for ordinary workers. The ultimate objective appears to be the creation of a two-tier property system where ordinary families are permanently excluded from property ownership, while government officials and their associates control all valuable real estate through advanced knowledge of policy changes and access to public investment funds that inflate property values in areas they already control. Brexit policies, immigration restrictions, and international trade agreements are being designed to benefit property investments owned by government officials while creating economic disruption that forces ordinary families to sell homes at distressed prices to wealthy investors with cash reserves and insider knowledge. The leaked documents suggest that government officials are positioning themselves to profit from a deliberate economic collapse that will destroy the wealth and housing security of millions of ordinary British families while transferring their assets to wealthy insiders who have used government positions to accumulate capital for this final wealth extraction phase. The timeline for this exit strategy appears to be coordinated with the 2025-2026 mortgage payment crisis that will force millions of families to sell their homes, creating investment opportunities for government officials who have used their positions to accumulate the cash reserves necessary to buy distressed properties from financially desperate families.